From Minneapolis, Minnesota, welcome to Playwright Center's Theater Begins Here.
Welcome to Theater Begins Here, a podcast for our Playwright Center members. I'm Hannah Joyce, Director of Membership Programs, and this is
Alayna Jacqueline, Membership Programs Manager, and we are the membership team that supports our 2,400 plus playwright members around the world.
And may I say, we are just 3 people away from having 2,500 members. So if anyone listening to this podcast is a playwright and wants to be a member, it's really easy to join. pwcenter.org/join. Well, we are meeting and chatting with Katie Ka Vang today, and it is my pleasure to introduce her. Katie Ka Vang is a playwright and theater artist of Hmong descent. Her work explores the complexities of community, the familial, dis-ease, and survivorship, and the refugee, immigrant, Asian American experience. Her plays and works include WTF, Hmong Bollywood, 5-1 Meaning of Freedom, 6-2 Use of Sharpening, Fast Forward Motions, In Quarantine, Final Round, and Spirit Trust. Her work has been developed and presented at Pangea World Theater, Pillsbury House Theater, Theater Mu, Leviathan Lab, Bushwick Star, Brown University, the Royal Court Theatre in London, the Walker Art Centre, Out North Art House, and more. She's received support from the Jerome Foundation, NET, the Knight Foundation, NPN, MRAC, MSAB, and Coalition of Asian American Leaders. She's a member of East West Players from the 2021-22 Playwrights Group. She was a 2021 Many Voices Fellow at Playwright Center and is delighted to be the 22-23 McKnight Fellow at the Playwright Center. Her first musical, Again, with music by Melissa Lee, just had its world premiere with Theater Mu, and it was beautiful, by the way. She's currently working on a commission from Civic Theater Ensemble in Ithaca, New York, and she holds an MFA in playwriting from Brown University. Welcome, Katie Ka.
Thank you. Also, I was like, I should have updated this, but thank you.
If there's anything you would like to add for our listeners to know, what would you add?
I would add that I am also a Constellation Fellow out of the Center for Cultural Power out of Oakland. And that's a national, it's a national fellowship. And I am an artist disruptor. So I'm so happy, only because I met the bunch like last week and it was very life-changing.
Yay.
I remember seeing pictures of you in the desert somewhere. So
yes, the desert. I think that's my new thing. I feel like I've never been to the desert before.
Yeah, you looked very powerful and like embodied.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
like disruptor too. I feel like that describes you very well.
Really? And I also don't mean to be one. I didn't even know that's what it was until, they gave me the definition. I was like, oh, I guess I am kind of one unintentionally, but now I know how to be more intentional.
Yeah, you can like fully step into that.
Yes.
All right. Well, first question that we have for you is, how did you get into theater?
How did I get into theater? I always feel like, so I grew up in like the Hmong church circuit. And so I think church, there's always different components of theatrics. And then, I grew up in doing praise and worship and choir. So that's like that. But I think I was maybe like in my mid-20s and I was working for like a Hmong nonprofit arts organization in the Twin Cities in St. Paul. And I was like, at that time, we're like a scrappy organization. So we're board members and volunteers and teaching artists and the whole thing, because nothing existed. And then I started to manage a young Hmong rock band. And that was kind of cool. So my training to theater was as an admin first, doing all these other art stuff. And this young Hmong rock band, they were amazing, fronted by like this Hmong American young woman. And I would like negotiate their contracts, get them gigs, But, I think with our cultural and like community expectations from my family, they would not show up for gigs sometimes. And I would get mad. I would get really angry. And then one day I was like, why am I so angry? And I was like, oh, because I want to be an artist. And so I think I was sort of like a closeted artist. So once I discovered that, I then was also working at the Advocates for Human Rights as like the front desk receptionist. And Dipankar Mukherjee with Pangea was a board member, and he came in once a month for board meetings. And one day he came in and he was like, I run a theater company and I'm looking for women of color who are interested in performing to help us make this piece for International Women's Day. And you don't need to have any like background. You just have to have like the willingness to learn. So I was like, yeah, sure. So I did that. And it was actually really like transformational in a way that like I think sometimes reminded me of the feeling that I got when I was like singing in church and like just feeling uplifted, but also contemplative and like the weird space, right? And so I was like, I really like this. I don't know what it is, but I want to do more. So then I started to build a relationship with Pangea World Theater. They were really my mentors and like my first foray into theater. And then out of that, they were like, you should start auditioning. I'm like, okay. But I was like, oh, I suck at this. And then when I did get casted, I was like, I don't really like this story. But I didn't know that. I was just like, biting the bullet and trying to move through as an actor. But I was like, I don't like this. So then I told Pangea, Perfecta Pangea, and they're like, well, why don't you start writing your own story? I was like, well, I'm not a writer. And so then, and I sometimes when I talk, I have like no filter. So I'll just like tell a bunch of shit, about like my family. And they're like, well, you should write that down. And that other story, you should write that down too. And so through a series of conversations and vignettes like that, I kind of pieced together my first solo show. So I was like a performer actor first.
I love this journey so much, like from church to band manager to accidental artist to I don't like this. I guess I'm gonna have to write something I do like. This is amazing.
I mean, I think the key thing for me is like there is like support behind that,
Yeah. Yeah. And people seeing you and saying this space is for you. So if you don't like it quite like this, why don't you try that? Like seeing the artist that was in you already. I know you went to, well, I said it, you went to grad school for playwriting. So at some point you decided this is the career path for me, or at least this is a place that I want to really get curious about whether or not I want to pursue it. Can you talk to us about what led you to that point and how you decided that you wanted to commit to this as a career path?
Yeah, I think after doing mini shows with Pangea and being a part of the ensemble and also creating my own shows with them. And then at that point, I had written a full cast show for Theater Moo. I wanted to do it, but I found myself like so I wanted to continue working in theater, but I felt like it didn't pay enough, and so, and I had the foresight of thinking of like, oh shit, like I'm getting older, being broke ain't cute, and like, how can I like try to make this sustainable? And so I think I had a conversation with the late Lori Carlos, And but I had this school conversation maybe 2 or 3 years before that, and she's like, "No, you shouldn't go yet. You don't need that yet." And then fast forward to my late 20s, and I had the conversation with her again. She was like, "I think you might be ready," you know. And so I thought that maybe grad school would be an element to help me be more sustainable. Yeah, and to like, I guess, taking the plunge to be like, I'm gonna do this for a living. So then I went to grad school, and that is a whole other thing.
That's another podcast topic.
Yes. Yes.
So you just wrote your first musical that just got produced again. What prompted you to kind of dip your toes into musical theater? Because that is very different than writing a straight play and a whole other collaborative process.
Yes. Yes. Oh my God. What prompted me? I think I was like trying to write a cancer play, right? Because I'm also a cancer survivor. I had cancer several times. I had relapsed twice. And went through like 2 bone marrow transplants. And so I try to, so then I was like, okay, how can I write about this? And it could be that like maybe I wasn't ready to write it either, or maybe I was writing it from the way that I knew, and that wasn't very healthy. And I just didn't know how to do any other way. And then I knew that I loved music. Like, yeah, that was sort of like my escape. And then I actually ran into a playwright friend of mine who I knew from the East Coast, who I think also has been through the Playwright Center, Mia Chung. And she was in town and was a part of like Nautilus Theater's whatever program they had. No, I don't know if it was like Rough Cuts or no, maybe that's the one we were in, Alayna.
You were in Librettis.
CLS.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't.
Composers,
They had-
librettists.
Yeah, but they had a program where they would commission like a playwright and a composer.
Yeah, Rough Cuts.
Yeah.
Mia for sure was in Rough Cuts now that I'm thinking about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So she was in town to work with her composer on that. I ran into her randomly by the Playwright Center, having coffee with someone. And so I'm like, oh my God, what are you doing here? And she's like, I'm trying to figure this thing out. We're going to have a showing on Thursday. You want to come? I'm like, sure. So I went to that, and she looked a lot like how I think I looked like, Alayna, I think when we were in CLS. And she was like, yeah, welcome. Thanks for coming. It is what it is, And but to me, I felt very like, oh, this could be a thing. And I felt like there was very little text in what I saw. And a lot of it was like underscored with music. And I think the way that, I don't know, the musicality and like little like things within the song like made things pop. And I was like, oh, I think maybe this thing that I'm trying to write doesn't have to be all text. So then I became very interested in like, oh, maybe I need to write a play with music, or like a music theater piece, or I didn't know. So from then on, I was like, okay, whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to try to like put myself with and around musical theater people and like try to learn as much. And then I think the CLS happened. But actually prior to that, I was like, I talked to Ben at Mia Chung's thing, and I was like, I want to do this. And how can I be a part of it? And he was like, well, next year's is like actually done, but we have this like Wesley Bulk Institute that's for performers. Do you want to do it? And I actually did it because not that I wanted to be musical theater, but because I just wanted to understand more about this world. And so I was like, sure. So I kind of jumped in as a performer and like was like, I was like singing Jewel, and like all these beautiful people were like singing operas. And I was like, here I am with my like spoons,
And I just want to jump in and say that you're talking about Ben Krywaz at Nautilus Music Theater. And so that listeners know, have a little context, and they're doing some amazing things over at Nautilus and have a lot of programs for folks who are trying to find collaborators or work in this musical theater from the side of a playwright or a composer, or as you're sharing, Katie, as a performer.
Yeah.
Since you were new to musical theater writing for yourself, this question may be a little fresher for you. And I think, for folks who are our members who maybe have never written a musical before and are kind of thinking about it, what would you say are the biggest differences or distinctions between writing a straight play versus writing the book for a musical?
I think the biggest thing is like, so when you're writing a straight play, I feel like I'm tussling with myself and like wrestling with it alone. But I think when I'm writing a musical, at least in my one experience, I am sort of like wrestling it with a partner or like with a creative collaborator, like pretty heavily and deeply. So I think that's maybe one of the biggest thing. Let's see. I will also say, I don't know. I just feel like, yeah, I would say that that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, that sounds like a big thing.
Yeah, and having someone to like, because I'm not the kind of writer who I'm like, this is what I'm going to write about. I feel like I mostly know my characters really well, and then they're like elements or like components to the piece, so I'm very much like, I'm just going to figure out what I'm trying to write about, and so I think having a collaborator who's like down to go on that journey was helpful too.
Yeah, and I know that I'm familiar with your work, so I know that your brain works a little differently when it comes to
Yes.
things. But how do you determine if this is a straight play versus a musical? And I'm going to throw in like a play with music, like defining those differences. How do you know when you see this story and you're just like, nope, a song has to go here. A song is what moves this forward. And what does the musical genre offer? I mean, you talked about this a little bit, but what does it offer that a straight play doesn't?
Yeah, well, I think I actually didn't know this, but I think it just made sense. I think when you talk about cancer, it becomes very like, it could come off as like very sad or very challenging or very hard. Like, who wants to come to a play about cancer, So I think one thing that music does is like, it kind of creates space for like levity and like, I think humor. But as far as like, how do you know what is a song or music? I mean, I think this is like my first musical. So a lot of the things I learned in like the Nautilus program, I really use that like, okay, so really this is like a scene introduction, right? But oftentimes in the beginning process, and I think me and Melissa's collaboration process, it's still evolving. But in this specific piece, I would like just write it like a play. I'll just like write a scene, write a monologue, and then Melissa and I will kind of talk through it. And then she'll be like, okay, well, let me try some stuff and then I'll come back. So I think there was like, the first song we wrote was actually the first song in the musical, which is One Day at a Time. And that was very much like the main character giving a speech, and then Melissa, well, how about this? So then she kind of like turned it into a song and then we'll like kind of zhuzh it together. But I think it's all of like those things, right? Like what is this big emotion that people can't say, or like, so I think it's also that, what is the big emotion that people aren't able to say? But then also like, what's a fun moment? I think we just really did what we wanted to do. Like, well, this could be a song or it could be a scene, but there were times when Melissa was like, I feel like I need music under this. And I'm like, no, I don't think the scene is going to work with music under it. Like it needs to be silent or it needs to not be underscored. So I think, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I feel like it's just, you just have to play with it. And when I was like, no music, I see Melissa working through like, okay, well, let me watch the scene. Does it work without music? And so it was a lot of that. And then also like, when Melissa would musicalize stuff, I'm like, okay, let me watch and see if this works. And I'm like, oh, it does work. And she's right. It's not supposed to be a scene or like dialogue. I mean, it's that and then, a song with like text in between where they're talking to each other. So it's, I feel like my brain is still all over the place.
But I feel like you're willing to explore other genres of writing. There's like the standard musical theater canon.
Mm-hmm.
And you're willing to explore a pop song that,
yeah.
Honestly, I was trying to find a recording of the pop song from Nautilus.
Oh my God.
I truly kind of wanted to play it.
Oh my I might have it somewhere. You should ask me.
But you would have pop, and then you would start playing with more experimental pieces where there's choir voices, like a little bit like the group Roomful of Teeth, where it's more sounds that are happening
Yeah.
when speaking.
Mhm.
And I just feel like you catch the vibe really quick of what you need in that moment.
Yeah.
Where the train was going, but
No,
I just feel like you intuitively know that in a way that I don't think that other people do. And I'm just wondering, like, in the collaborative space, do you ever like bite down and are just like, okay, wait a second, let the music be the music, like the music person be the music person, and I will stay here and be the playwright?
Yes, I do that all the time. Like I always enter a collaboration with like, I don't know anything. And I think some people might think that's like naive, but I think it's sort of like a good way to step back and see the whole. And so, and it's true, right? Because I feel like composers, at least in our collaboration with Nautilus, like those collaborations, like I'm like, they know a shit ton, and I'm just gonna sit back and listen. But also, if it doesn't feel right, I'm just gonna like step away or pull back a little bit, you know, and hope they catch the vibe, which I think some of them did. But yeah, I think as I'm just naive and like open to it. Also, I've gone through some like shit in my life, like health wise, and I'm like, you know what? Life is too short to like be precious about certain things. And I'm not in a place where like I'm trying to hold on to like this word or this script or this thing. And I'm like, so I really just try to come with it with like, I think more is better, and like collaboration can only make things better. It's not always easy. And I think it's easy to also lose your voice and lose the story that you're trying to tell, when you often come with like this, I don't know anything attitude, you know, because I think sometimes people who do know better but want to tell the story they want to tell. Right. So I think it's important to also have, you know, a collaborator that you can be joyful with and also get angry at, you know, and then also really have those conversations and cry together, cry to each other, cry against each other, you know. And so I think, yeah, so I think it was really important. And it's all like a learning process. It really is. Like go like, oh shit. And then I learn a lot about myself too in that process. Like, oh, okay. All right. So I don't
Because
know.
it's a relationship.
It
And
really is.
if
Yeah.
you're engaged in it and being self-reflective, then you're going to learn something about yourself because it's a relationship.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to keep us on the collaboration topic because we're here, and ask you how you found your collaborator, your composing partner, and what that process was like. Was there like a conversation? Did you have to talk about the ways that you work? You know, what kinds of things did you have to navigate together before you began working together?
Yeah. Well, thankfully, this was a commission from Theater Moo. So, and thankfully, they trusted me, never having written a musical. When I told them that I wanted to write them, they're like, okay. And then they really stepped up and offered to introduce me to like a bunch of composers. And so, Lily Tung Crystal, who's the artistic director of Theater Moo, set me up with on like a bunch of Zoom dates with a bunch of like composers. And they were all amazing. Like, you know, she gave me the list, you know, and I like stalked them all, went on their websites, listened to their music, and I was like, how am I supposed to do this? You know, I was like, oh my God, like everyone is so talented. I then started my Zoom dates with these folks, and you know, they're all good. And it's also vibe, you know, vibe and like what vibe is appropriate for the project that I'm like sort of envisioning. Yeah, I think then Melissa was one of those. And it kind of like, you know, you know, I liked her vibe. I felt like there was an easygoing about her, something easygoing about her. And I think she liked the fact that I wasn't like a classically trained like musical theater writer. And that was actually why I liked her too, is because she wasn't like a classically trained like musical theater writer. She was a classically trained pianist, but not a musical theater person. And also I like that she doesn't know, but back when she had a duo with Kit Yan, who they're still creative partners now, but back then, like maybe over 15 years ago, they were on tour as Good Asian Drivers, just the two of them, and she played folk music. You know, yeah. or what I think is like folk music. And I opened for them when I was like dabbling in like spoken word poetry. And I was like, oh my God, this is like kind of crazy, you know? Yeah.
That's
So,
amazing.
yeah. So that made it more appealing. Yeah.
Oh, did you write the lyrics or did Melissa write the lyrics? And you talked a little bit about how you had to listen and compromise, and sometimes one person's feelings, took
Yeah.
precedence in the other person. How did you navigate those moments?
Yeah. So we would talk about a scene or like a moment, and then she would go and like turn the scene or the language into lyrics. And then she'd bring it back, and then we both judge it. And I'd be like, well, maybe not this, or how about this? Or like, I don't think this verse should be like that. I think in this verse, I should be talking about this. And so I think she wrote the lyrics, and then I sort of came in and like judged it and add additional lyrics to it. And it continues to go back and forth and,
Well, I know that we've talked a lot about Nautilus because I feel like that was a spark in this process. And we got to know each other really deeply through that process because it was a very intense 2 weeks turning around a music product. It was like every 36 hours. That felt impossible each time. And Ben Krivos has given us like, literally, we have like a 2-inch binder of just all the principles of specifically collaboration. So it can definitely apply to more than just musical theater. But this was just the setting, and that's obviously the mission of Nautilus. What, if Ben is listening, what is the thing that has like stuck with you the most? And what do you think was, I know there's plenty of valuable things, but in this process for, again, what things did you bring in from Nautilus into that process?
oh man, I felt like, the whole scansion thing, I feel like that I didn't bring that in, but that's something that once it started happening, I was like, oh, this is that thing that that we learned in CLS.
Can you describe that a little bit, what you mean by scansion?
I actually feel like maybe Alayna can talk about that.
I was like, I hope that Katie has like a clear definition of what this is.
Or how it manifested in your work, even if you can't like totally like.
Yeah, totally. Like I would be like, hey, Melissa, how about this? And I would like write a verse. It's like, well, yeah, but it doesn't scan very well. I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, oh yeah. Like it doesn't, the rhyme scheme and like the rhythm of it doesn't go well with the melody, all the melody currently exists. And that's, that is a skill, and so I was like, oh, this is that thing that we learned in CLS. But I think the biggest thing that kept coming back to me, and I think I'm learning to also not hold on to it too much, or otherwise I'm gonna get it'll like make me immobile in collaborations, is writing a musical, writing whatever, any kind of creative collaboration. It really is about the art of collaboration, right? And it's like learning when do you compromise, when is it worth it, when is it not worth it, and so I mean, throughout this collaboration, a lot of those questions came to me and like I'm like, should I just keep fighting for this, should I not, what is worth it, it's my first musical, what does that mean I don't fight enough, like all of the questions came. I don't know if that answered your question, Alayna.
No, it did. It did. I do have a question for scansion, because there were some people that getting the right words on the right beat. There were people that like had Excel sheets to make sure each syllable was like coming on the right beat. And is this a question? That means the note needs to go up. If it's, is it a statement? That means it needs to either stay the same or go down, and things like that. I'm wondering if you became that anal and like had your spreadsheet.
I mean, I feel like you already know the answer to that. And that is no, I wasn't that person. And maybe I might one day. But so one thing that also really made me excited about Melissa is that we started this, like, when we connected, we're like, okay, yeah, maybe let's try something. So we did like this mock like collaboration. and I gave her some like a scene, and then she turned it into a song. One thing that I did take away from many things, but one thing I remembered from our CLS collaboration is that like it's helpful if composers have text that is more visceral, that is also visceral. And so I really wrote in, it'll just be like a journal where I'm like, I'm walking into the hospital and I get hooked up to a machine and then drip, 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 the chemo comes in, drip, drip, drip. And so the way that she's able to translate that into music was like, it was like kind of exciting when I first heard it. I'm like, oh my God. And there's just a line in the song where it's like, in goes the chemo. And then like this piano note's like, it's like chemo dropping in. And I'm like, oh my God. And so that made me very excited and brought a lot of like nostalgia from our days.
You wrote a piece that one of the composers put on her album, Linda.
Yes.
And they played it at the release party.
They did? I thought they were going to play a recording only.
Well, they played a recording of it.
Okay.
They could not get all of the singers because it was more choral, but it's How the Gods Made Me Stop, or the Gods Made Me Stop and Look. And that was also about your cancer journey. And that's just a really visceral piece. Like, it's a very visceral piece of just like describing looking at the Mississippi River and what does it feel like to be in the ocean. And I feel like, and like, what is it to like jump out of an airplane? And I feel like you are a very descriptive writer.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that lends itself really heavily to music, which kind of makes me wonder about like stage directions with you in musicals. Is how hands-on are you? Are you telling the director exactly what to do? Are you talking to the musicians in that moment of just like, this whole thing is supposed to swell? Or are you truly relying on your composer to put this in the music and then people just catch that vibe?
I think both. So there are some moments where I know I'm like, I feel like this has to be, and swelling is not even the word. I'm like louder, or like, I feel like it needs to be faster here. And then like, it just kind of like slows down, So like I use that kind of lingo. So I think it is both. So I do that. And then sometimes Melissa will just do it. And I'm like, oh, I loved how you did that, And then sometimes it's also like the director that comes in. And again, mind you all, I'm only one musical deep. So this is the only thing that I know right now. But sometimes Nana's like, I feel like we should add this. Or like she'll just do some kind of like awesome blocking. I think you saw it, but in the Santorini song, like that blocking was all Nana, like with the martini glass and the inflatable, And so then with that, we're able to add like little dings and like things to like bring the music really underscores that. So I think it's both. It's both. But I don't say the music should swell here. I'm like, it gets louder. I hope that'll change as I move further along. But I'm okay with that. I'm okay with not knowing and like using improper language and whatever.
Keeping it real, Katie. We have a lot of playwright members who are interested in dipping their toes into writing musicals for the first time. And one of the reasons we thought this would be such a great conversation with you is that it was your first in a way, and it's still very fresh, this collaborative process, the writing process, the production, all of it. And so I would love to know from your perspective how you might encourage somebody to begin, and if there was any training or experience or learning you might recommend to somebody as they were thinking about this.
Yeah, I think one thing is don't be afraid to be dumb because it'll feel like, you're in a different element. I think too, for sure, like anything similar to the composer libretto studio that Nautilus Theater has, that is really amazing. And then I think just like with I think, and I said a lot, in already, but I think to something that I say to a lot of like young playwrights who want to do theater or want to be a playwright, I'm like, just go see theater. just go see musicals, things that you can go see, like even bad musicals, good musicals, like anything, and like try to like surround yourself with like that thing. And then I think on like a very more practical level, and I think a writing exercise that I would one day, I think, use in like a future class is like put together like a playlist of 5 songs that you really like and just practice writing like an introduction to that song if it was like gonna be on a stage or something. Like very short, maybe like 2 minutes, and then write an outro to those songs. So something like that.
That's super practical. And you can do that from the comfort of your own home. I love that.
Yeah, or just in your car thinking about something like, oh, what if this was a thing?
Do you ever find yourself recording on your phone? Like, I liked this little melody. Like, I made this up in my head today driving, and then like send it to Melissa. Or did you ever try and get on the piano and pluck something out?
So I actually used to play the piano very little bit, like by ear. And then I trained myself how to play Kenny G's, one of Kenny G's songs. So I can read music, but I'm just very slow at it. And so, like I know a little bit of music, I can play melodies, but to your question, no, I never did that, but I did do that earlier when I was a performance artist, when I think I felt like less rules, and just didn't know any better, which, trying to get back to. Yeah. Do you do that, Alayna?
I do it sometimes, especially like in the librettist studio. I was just like, is this a possibility? I'm just throwing this out there really quick and then back off. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, is this cool? No? Okay, I'll put it back.
That's amazing. And yeah, I mean, I think that resonates a lot. And I did that a lot too, And if they were like, oh my God, no, then I'm like, well, why?
Oh, I wouldn't even ask why. I would just be like, oh, that's fine. Yep.
Katie's like, I need to know for next time. Why? Well, speaking of next time, after having this experience of writing a musical and producing it with Theater Moo and Melissa Lee, are you ready to start your next musical, or do you feel like you need a break?
I feel like I could probably start something else right now. Another music theater piece. Yeah. I don't know if it's a musical, but yeah.
That's exciting.
Do you know what it's about at all?
No idea. No idea. I know I just want to get in the room with like musicians. Yeah. Or like a musical friend of mine. Yeah.
Well, it's about that time.
Wow.
It's a really big question. But before we do, is there anything else that you would like to add, or some things that you think that we might have missed, or you just want to tell our adoring fans that are listening?
Not really. I mean, thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting PWC. If you're not a member, join.
That's right.
Well, then we are to our theater begins here ... question. Do you still want to go last?
Yes.
Do you want to go, Hannah?
Sure.
We never know which one of us will go.
No, I'll go first. I pulled this little gem from the very beginning of our conversation. So this part of the podcast is where we like to say where theater begins, and usually we pull it from our conversation. And when you were talking about your early days of realizing that you were a closeted artist, trying to support other artists, but then realizing I'm getting angry because the artist inside of me is just trying to claw her way out. So I was thinking about that. And then Dipankar was your mentor. And he said to you when you were working on trying to write your first piece, you just need a willingness to learn. So I would like to say that I think theater begins with a willingness to learn.
That's a good one. I thought you were going to say something about the closeted artist, because I was like, that's why I wanted to do that.
It's all yours, Alayna.
I was like, no, Hannah.
No, I'm not taking it from you.
Yeah, because when you said that, that really resonated with me. But I was thinking about when a closeted artist gets caught. When I mean like, and what I mean by caught is like I'm about to like hype Hannah up. So Hannah can sing, and I've always known that Hannah can sing, but I've always heard her sing more classical or Irish, like classic songs. And we went to karaoke. Yes, Hannah was at karaoke. It was great.
What?
And she sang a Frank Sinatra song, and I was like, oh my gosh, you could easily be in a lounge, and then like easily. And I was like, Hannah, I caught you. Like like your voice can do that. And then she sang more of like a 90s grunge song. And I was like, oh my gosh, Hannah, why didn't you do 90s grunge?
Yeah.
Like that is one of my greatest disappointments in the world, that Hannah has not been in a 90s grunge band. So I'm just going to put that out there for you, Katie.
Thank you. That's great information to like.
I just want to push that is like Hannah is also a phenomenal actress as well. So yeah, Hannah, I'm like, oh my gosh, I just caught you. I don't know why you're not releasing 90s grunge music. So that's my long-winded way of saying theater begins when a closeted artist is seen or gets caught and is supported to come out and become a disruptor.
Whoa.
Yes, you inspired that.
Oh my God. Y'all, those two are so okay. Yeah. So good. I don't know. I don't even know. I was like, oh man. Okay, let's see. I gotta think about now. Okay. Theater begins. I feel like mine is too like basic. Y'all's was not basic, but
We were just listening to you, Katie Ka. So I feel like we cheated by taking all the good things you said.
I mean, I want to say something super. This is how I feel about playwriting. And I think in some ways it rings true to also like musical theater writing in my last process, my first and only plot process. But I think it's like something about like theater begins like in the editing process, and I'm trying to like relay that in like a musical theater writing sense, but that's not true though. So let me do something else. I don't know.
It doesn't have to be about musical theater though.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a whole conversation about musical theater, but theater begins, we didn't talk about musical theater.
That's true. Okay. Yeah, I think maybe theater begins with the willingness to learn. Now I'm just going to start spouting out a bunch of things.
Do it. Let's say them all.
No.
Just everything.
No. So there's that. Theater begins when there's the willingness to learn. Theater begins when you allow yourself to like be a student again. Theater begins when you lead with the heart. Theater begins with emotional truth. Blah, blah, blah.
You guys love all of those. Yes. We got bonus content. Oh, Katie Ka, thank you so much for this conversation.
Oh, thank you for having me. I feel very lucky and privileged to be here to talk to you too, hang out and talk shit, I guess.
Yeah,
the podcast.
That's right.
And I will put in a link to, I think your song is on Spotify. I think Linda's whole album is on Spotify.
Oh my God.
So I will link to it or see if we can put it as a bonus track if Linda gives permission.
Great.
My song is also on there.
Yes, that's right. Yes, it is.
I want to hear all of this. And then if you have that song that we were talking about before, that Alayna was looking for.
Oh my gosh, I want it. All I know is it ends in doom, 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 doom. We're girls.
No, the doom, doom, doom part is a part of the chorus.
So it just sounds like the opening of like a sitcom, like of a girl that's like
Girls Five Eva. Have you seen that? Girls Five Eva.
It's exactly like that. Like it should be a Girls Five Eva song.
Maybe.
I hope they're listening.
Thanks for listening to Playwright Center's Theater Begins Here.